Because it used to be, the American dream is marry, kids, house, purchased, by the time you're like 30.
Right.
And now the average age for the first-time home buyer is, 40.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halaschak. And Zach, you had an interview with former Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross.
Yep.
A figure from the first Trump administration.
From the whole Trump first administration. He
Yep.
was there all 4 years, so.
Kept his
one of
job
the
the whole
rare ones.
time.
Yeah.
Obviously, some things in his former policy purview are before the Supreme Court right now. What did you guys talk about?
Yeah, so we kind of talked a lot about the current Supreme Court case that's going on right now related to tariffs. There's a bunch of states and companies that are suing the administration, saying that Trump is using this IEPA, the basically emergency economic powers, wrongfully, and that they should be overturned. So it's kind of all culminated in this Supreme Court oral arguments this week. And so Wilbur Ross was watching those, and obviously he's been around for quite some time, so he has a lot of expertise in that area. But his thought about it was kind of that he thinks there'll be some sort of split decision. He said it didn't seem like they either went one way or the other per se. So, it's very uncertain what's going to happen. And if some of these tariffs are knocked down, then what means Trump has to reimpose them through other avenues, other executive avenues, or how that all is going to shake out. But he said it wasn't really clear exactly what's going to happen on that. But we also talked a little bit about how tariff policy during Trump 2.0 is different than when he was there in his first term.
Sure.
And it's markedly different. We have these sweeping across the board, all-encompassing tariffs this time around that you can't really hide from, essentially.
Right.
While in the first time around, there was more country by country, and we talked a little bit about transshipment. So him kind of advocating for the across the board, because he's like, companies can't just relocate and finish a product in a third-party country and then avoid the tariffs that way, because there's tariffs across the board. Talked a little bit about how there's essentially no exclusions and exemptions process this time around. So first time around, Trump 1.0, there's this whole, hesitant to say cottage industry, but there's tens of thousands of these applications for items that they wanted excluded from tariffs. There was a formal process. Ross was very adamant about saying he thought that was important to have one of those processes in place. This time around, there's no formal process. Essentially, it comes down to, if you're a CEO and you want to get something exempted, you have to go to the Oval Office and talk to Trump, and then he gives the approval there. Ross said it's somewhat of a philosophical difference between the two. But yeah, it was a pretty wide encompassing article on tariff policy, and a lot has changed, but a lot has stayed the same. And one thing that's remained the same is the president's desire to really impose tariffs and make countries pay for perceived perceptions that it's unfair to the U.S. with trade agreements that are in place.
So we had elections. The elections didn't go very well for Republicans.
Not great, yeah.
Cost of living was a very big issue in most of these races. Has that caused Republicans, other than the president, to really reposition themselves at all on the tariffs?
Not really. No, I've been on Capitol Hill this week asking about that, and I haven't heard really any Republican senators, at least the House is out, but any Republican senators really say we need to stop. You need to take the gas off of the tariffs. This is, they're kind of not linking the tariffs to inflation. And, there's something to be said for, I don't know how much inflation is actually being caused by the tariffs. And some people say it's very, very little. Some people say it's a lot. But put that aside for a second. If you look at some of these consumer sentiment and consumer confidence surveys that are going out, people are linking tariffs to expectations of higher inflation. So whether or not they see that, and the voters sees that in their mind. So I think as we get closer to the midterms, it might be something that's talked about more, is how do we message on tariffs when voters and Democrats are telling voters Trump is doing this, he's making your life unaffordable because he's imposing tariffs. How the Republicans end up countering that messaging, we'll see, but it's going to be a tough challenge for them.
So there's an interesting new stat about new home buyers. What is it?
Well, the median age for the first-time home buyer is actually crept up to 40 years old now, which is, I think, people 20, 30 years ago would be kind of jaw on the floor if they heard that. Yeah, because it used to be, the American dream is marry, kids, house, purchased, by the time you're like 30.
Right.
And now the average age for the first-time home buyer is, 40, which is quite high. And there's a few different reasons behind that, but it's really just not a very good environment right now for first-time home buyers. home prices are high. They haven't really gone down, and mortgage rates are still relatively high compared to some baseline stuff. They're going down a little bit, which is helping with affordability, but it's really tough for people right now who want to go out and purchase a home, especially people who might not have a lot of savings because of the inflation. They've had been paying more on things like rent at apartments or things like food and groceries. So it's just the dollar doesn't stretch as far, and it's been very challenging for the housing market. And we've seen both parties kind of pushing for reforms or some sort of legislation to make the situation better. Tim Scott and Elizabeth Warren actually came out with a bipartisan Road to Housing Act, which aims to increase supply, which has been a thing. We need more housing supply if we want prices to go down. But it's going to take a lot of work to kind of get us out of this hole, I feel like.
Because housing itself has become a major cost of living issue.
Sure. Yeah, it's a big portion of what people are spending out of their paycheck every month. And, when you add on electricity costs rising at the same time and, food prices still in some categories being too high, it's just a combination that makes buying a house and having that ability to buy a house kind of out of reach for many Americans.
Thank you, Zach.
Yep.
You can read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.